I don't know about you, but I have said some really stupid things over the years. Worse, some of these dumb observations I actually wrote down, so they're now preserved for posterity, in print, forevermore. Writers, in particular, need to be careful. Otherwise, your words could come back to bite you in the book. For example, in chapter 7, Pearls of Great Price, in the Beer Drinker's Guide to God, on page 81, second paragraph, I wrote, and you can read, "In my early years of ministry, I preferred funerals to weddings. Not to sound cynical, but the former just seemed so much more hopeful than the latter." Perhaps Kinky Friedman captured my earlier sentiments when he courageously defended gay marriage during his Texas gubernatorial campaign, saying, "Why shouldn't they be allowed to be miserable like the rest of us?" Well, here I am, 13 days, 7 hours, and 35 minutes, until I stand at the altar of our historic chapel and say, "I do" to the woman of my dreams. My plan was to grow old surrounded solely by my dogs. We plan, God laughs. And God always gets the last laugh. I find that being in love and finally finding my person is quite the opposite of being miserable. In fact, I find myself being hopeful, grateful, and joyful. Now, this whole engagement thing has been really interesting, especially the premarital counseling part. I'm usually the one conducting the counseling, and I've worked with hundreds of couples as they prepare to commit to the greatest adventure that life has to offer, loving another. But now I'm the student. Sandy and I have done all of the work required by the canons of the church and much more. We've assembled all of the necessary documents. We filled out the Prepare Enrich inventory that evaluates various aspects of our relationship. We've explored our Myers-Briggs types. She's an ENFP and I'm an INFJ. We've looked at our Enneagram numbers. We're both 7s, which makes us excellent playmates. And we've even participated in a special Enneagram for Couples program. We've worked extensively with a psychologist on effective and healthy communication, how to better identify and understand our particular triggers, patterns, and defense mechanisms, and how not to kill each other when we fight, which we're going to do on occasion. I don't call her my spicy jalapeno princess for nothing. We've done goal-setting exercises together, engaged in financial planning, worked on various versions of a family budget, depending on whether I lose $10,000 or I lose $50,000 on the new book. Writers make less money than priests, which is saying a lot. And yet, she loves me anyway. And I love her back. And that is the heart of the matter of the heart. For in the end, it's not about a transaction, it's about a relationship. It's not about an assignment, it's about a commitment. It's less about what we learn in our heads and more about what we deeply long for in our hearts. While everything that we learn about ourselves and each other is really important, as is all of that planning, those techniques and types, the various insights and understanding, all of those have meaning and they can help. But as the Apostle Paul pointed out so beautifully, without love, without deep, aware, committed, unconditional love, all of those other things add up to nothing. They amount to, as I might have said back in Texas, they amount to as much as a hill of beans. Not much, and not nearly as valuable as the deep desire and will to love. Which brings me to the parable of the talents. Now, like premarital counseling, there are lots of surface-level teachings and gleanings that go along with the story. They're all important. They're not to be dismissed, diminished, or discounted. But the heart of the matter is another matter altogether. For ultimately, this parable is not about a transaction, but about a relationship. It's about what is shared at a deep level between the giver and the gifted, the trust between the entrusted and the trusting. I've preached on this parable many times, and truly there are many helpful insights to unpack within it, including those pertaining to financial matters, which do matter. It's obvious that the master in this story is quite savvy when it comes to business, investing, and management. One of the primary financial lessons revealed is that whether we're talking about business or faith or love, the greater the risk, the greater the yield. In anything that matters, you have to invest fully, up front, from the beginning. And while that may be risky, there's no reward without it. In 13 days, 7 hours, and 28 minutes, I'm going to become a father, or at least a stepfather. And with that role, I'm aware, comes responsibility. I'm going to do my very best to impart to my children, though they are adults, spiritual, relational, and even financial wisdom. My Sunday school teachers, my father, my older brother, all taught me some very important principles about finances. In fact, by the time I was 5 years old, I had a philosophy that I could name: share, save, spend, in that order. Some of us who are closer to 50 still haven't learned such wisdom. When I was 6 years old, my dad took me to the bank so I could open up my very own savings account with birthday and Christmas money. I started mowing lawns at age 12. I worked in a hardware store every afternoon after school and on Saturdays starting at age 15. I paid cash for my first bicycle and cash for my first car. When I was a very young man, my father gave me the classic book on finance, The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clason. I can still tell you the rules. Number 1, start thy purse to fattening. Number 2, control thy expenditures. Number 3, make thy gold multiply. Number 4, guard thy treasure from loss. Number 5, make of thy dwelling a profitable investment. Number 6, ensure a future income. And number 7, increase thy ability to earn. Now, there were lots of lessons learned from that book, including don't get your jewelry advice from a bricklayer. Get your bricklaying advice from a bricklayer. I purposely chose the path less lucrative when I became a priest, but because of such imparted wisdom, and because I learned the value of sharing, I've done okay. This parable reinforces some of those financial lessons I've learned. But just as sharing has been an important part of the equation for me, so is stewardship an important part of the point of this parable. To be a good steward for our Master is to do right and to do well with what God has so lovingly entrusted to us. We learn in this parable that, number 1, everything we have is pure gift. And we are called with grateful hearts to cherish and value and put those gifts to work to help and enrich all. Number 2, that each of us has been given different gifts, different talents. God has invested each of us with different abilities and called each of us to different purposes. But the ultimate end of every purpose and every person is to glorify God. Number 3, a good steward is always willing to avail herself of any opportunity for increase as God presents them and makes them known to us. We're called to take chances, to risk everything when God entrusts us with the precious opportunities to do good, to share the gospel, to make a difference. I'll give you one very real example that occurred right here at Christ Church about 5 years ago. There was this one young, dynamic female priest whose husband got transferred to the international paper plant in Bogalusa, just up the road. She was moving to this area and looking for a job. What a coincidence. She needed a job, and we needed her. But you see, we had not anticipated such an expenditure. There was no money in our budget, and things, as they always are for churches, were really tight. But our church leaders at that time did not say, we can't afford to do this. Rather, they said, we can't afford not to do this. Thank God they had the wisdom and insight to bring Mother Morgan McIntyre into our community. I can't imagine where we'd be without her. When God places an opportunity in your lap, you invest in it. Even when you think you have insufficient funds. In ministry as in life, nothing ventured, nothing gained. The faithful never say, "We just can't risk it." The faithful always ask, "How can I be more generous in order to embrace the opportunities that God places before us?" Stewardship principles, like those of finance, are really important in this parable. But we can't stop there. To do so would be to stay at the surface level of insight. For ultimately, this parable is not about a transaction. It's about a relationship. It's about how, when we know that we are loved and appreciated and treasured and valued, can risk everything on behalf of our beloved. It's about how, when we're confident of our Master's confidence in us, can act not with caution and cowardice, but with courage and conviction. It's about a level of trust between true partners in ministry that allows us, in fact, empowers us to enter fully into joy. If we view God like this third servant did, as harsh, demanding, unforgiving, judgmental, if we operate from a place of fear and anxiety, afraid that we might disappoint, if we make our decisions based on scarcity rather than abundance, on withholding rather than liberality, on decree rather than delight, we'll find ourselves shut out and shut off by our own timidity and hesitation rather than by any act of our loving Lord. As the Message translation describes this isolated individual's choices, what a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you thought that I was after your best, why did you do the least? What the parable is ultimately telling us is that, as daunting as it may seem to invest in the unseen, God loves us enough to give us everything, including God's self, so that we can respond in kind. Don't hold back. Don't withdraw. Don't be afraid. Don't take the precious gift that you have been given and bury it, protect it, hold on to it. And in so doing, miss out on the greatest blessing of this life. Know this: the Master loves you. You no longer have to be miserable. You can go all in for love, in love. The wonderful spiritual writer, Father Simeon, put it this way: our greatest talent and treasure is our ability to love. And in this enterprise, the true champion is the greatest risk taker, the one most willing to invest himself completely despite the odds. The poet Rumi captured this sentiment so beautifully with these words: gamble everything for love. Half-heartedness will never reach the divine. And Paul expressed it so powerfully with this exhortation: owe no one anything except to love. On November 28th, in 13 days, 7 hours, and 19 minutes, I'm going all in for love. It's a chance I can't wait to take.